Your life isn't over when you're 30, but it very much feels like the case these days, and this 30 number continues to haunt us whether you're 20, 30, 40, 50, or even 60, through how we talk about feeling behind or having regrets later on in life. So I'm going to let you on a secret today that nobody else talks about in these types of videos, and that is time itself to help you. It's time, get it, for a much needed reset. If you're new to my channel, welcome. Thank you for being here. I talk about anything and everything holistically to help you uncover your potentials. We've all heard the quote, comparison's the thief of joy, and at this point we all intellectually understand it and roll our eyes at it, but we actually struggle to process and live it on a deep level. We are all well aware of child and teen prodigies like Mozart playing the piano at the age of 3, Greta Thunberg addressing the UN at age 16, and Blackpink debuting when the youngest members were only 19 and achieving worldwide fame. While we know that these are just exceptions to the case, the way that we repeatedly reinforce the merits of high-achieving youth has really been ingrained in the stories we grew up with, and as children and teenagers when their brains were so malleable, we really didn't have the capacity to differentiate between societal or social truth with our own truth. So we subconsciously grow up with these invisible time expectations that continues to hold us down. And on the flip side, when we start feeling like we're a lost cause, of course we swing to the other side of the pendulum, where we get the cliche motivational examples of people who were late starters and didn't become successful until later on in their lives, like Taika Waititi directing at 30, Vera Wang opening her first bridal store at 40, and Steve Carell landing his first breakout role in The Office at 43. I think inherently these are all well-intentioned to encourage us to just keep trying, and that age is by no means a measure of our worth. But if we're not careful about this narrative, we still end up reinforcing a very warped sense of timeline, where at the end of the day, it just puts age, just another currency of time, at the center of the stage, and in relation to what it means to sync up with the overwhelming pressure of tying accomplishment with time. And these generic advice just use older age to build a case of temporary relief for us, basically slapping a band-aid on the root issue, and we revert back to our own internal timelines that have been drilled into us after we finish that article or YouTube video. But I'm all about getting to the bottom of things here, so let's not be wishy-washy with some generic advice. But first, how can we talk about feeling behind without talking about time itself? Let's rewind a little and understand time as a phenomenon from a historical perspective. This will be fascinating stuff. Particularly, I wanted to focus on an event in British history that was mind-blowing to me when I first came across it. It goes a little something like this. On a Wednesday evening in 1751, millions of British subjects went to bed peacefully and slept for a whole 12 days. This was the night of Wednesday, September 2nd, and all those under the British Empire unanimously agreed to only wake up until the next day, Thursday, the September 14th. So if you were paying attention, that absolutely made no sense. But this, my friend, is not a fiction, but actually a real event known as the British Calendar Act of 1751, where after almost 200 years of resistance, the British Empire switched from the Julius Caesar calendar system, which has 365.25 days, to the Gregorian calendar authorized by Pope III in 1545, which has 365.2425 days and more accurately captures the solar year. And this Gregorian calendar system is still what we use today as part of our 365, sometimes 366-day calendar system. This may just seem like a fun trivia, but it's not. While we usually just accept that time is what we see on the clock or on our iPhones, time as we know it is actually a set of social agreements that have changed and shifted over human history. So for example, if you think about how daylight savings work, essentially it's a form of agreement that people living in North American and European cities collectively abide to. So how the earth rotates and the sun shines have absolutely not really changed much, but our perception of time changes for those months. And if we don't abide by that social agreement, then we would be out of sync with everyone else, and the time that we speak will always be an hour behind. And this is just one of the many examples of how time is a social construct, where the ultimate goal of what we perceive now as just objective time is used as a form of standardization to enable convenience in global trade, political and social settings, so all parties and individuals speak the same language. If you want to look into this further, Alex Capel made a great video on time being a social construct, which I'll link below, as well as 2 additional links that specifically covers 2 instances of time resets in the US and globally. What I'm trying to get at here is not that we should become time anarchists yelling in the street, "Time is a social construct!" For us to understand that the standard ways we measure ourselves with time, especially with age, are just inventions by the systems to control us so we can continue to be productive forces to feed into the competitive economic landscape, and hence the birth of our favorite cult, productivity. But before I get too carried away, let's speed things up to the present day, and let's word for word lay out the timeline that's trapped in our minds that is making us feel behind and miserable. I think this is absolutely critical to put down on paper and video, even though it might seem really obvious, because we really need to talk about these expectations concretely before we can dismantle and move on from them. Obviously, this will differ by where you live and the communities that you engage with, but on a global Western scale, it more or less looks something like from ages 0 to 18, by societal standards, you are still a child and a teen and remain under the guardianships of parents. You attend school, start forming a basic understanding of who you are, and discover what subjects you're good at to start dreaming about what you'll do when you grow up. Around ages 18 to 22, or generally early 20s, is when you attend college or maybe a postgraduate degree if you can afford either, to solidify what it is that you really want to do and start either avoiding or preparing for the capitalistic life. From ages 22 to roughly mid to late 20s is when you can explore and flow around in a quote-unquote a real world, date with different types of people, explore different interests under the premise that you are now a responsible adult. Late 20s, say 27 to 28 to early mid-30s is when you should have already settled into long-term relationships, ideally married, start procreating, and the most damn of them all, have a career figured out and stick with it for the rest of your life. And after that, who cares? The end. So whether you agree with that or not, the idea that keeps being hounded on us is basically to be ahead or at least on par with timelines means we should have everything figured out in the first third or at worst half of our lives, and pretty much everything afterwards is some black void of anarchy for us to figure out. And this is where all dissonance from us feeling behind comes in, when we have this invisible timeline, which is the greatest social construct of all times, that we actively measure ourselves against and find others around us that really peacock this mastery over time and look at ourselves and say, damn, I'm so behind in life, what the F am I doing with my life? In psychology, this would be a form of cognitive dissonance, where we're experiencing conflicting information internally, suffer from it as a result, and therefore will do anything to resolve it. So in this case, the underlying belief, regardless of whether we believe it or not, is the social expectations of the timelines imposed on us, feeling scared, anxious, or sad when we're not meeting that timeline that we've internalized, and therefore will do whatever it takes to close that gap or dissonance, aka why you're watching this video. But let's throw that timeline out the window for now. I want to bring us to the most extreme example and do a little mental exercise to help us understand how it is that we can live our own timelines, because the social timeline will always exist in some shape or another, and that is lifespans and mortality. We all know that everyone will live to different ages, but we absolutely don't think about it in the context of this arbitrary timeline. So on a global level, on one spectrum, you have the average lifespans of 85 in Hong Kong and Japan, US somewhat in the middle of 79, and down to 56 in Nigeria and Chad. So say you're a 25-year-old living in the US, you had lived your relative lifespan of approximately 32%, but the same person elsewhere could have already lived almost up to 50% of their lives already. And this isn't even with other considerations like gender, genetics, lifestyle, social economics, local healthcare policies, and honestly, luck. So pretty much where you're born, what income level you're born into, and what gender are already predetermined traits and already makes up a big factor of how long you will live. And while we may not know how long we will live, we all know by the fact that those around us will all have different lifespans, and therefore the course of our past should not be treated the same. So why are we trying to follow the same timeline as if everyone's timelines will be the same? I think a big part is our belief in democracy, the idea that everyone has the same chance until we find ourselves in a situation that proves otherwise. And another part is that we are ultimately too scared to live our own truth and fear of judgment from those who really have devoted all of their lives to that timeline. So then you might be wondering, how do we live our own truth? And that is to recognize that you alone are time, and how you experience time is built within you, and all objective times outside of you is relative. Time is not a resource, not a commodified good, because it is priceless and unique only to you. We all say our biological clocks are ticking, implying that we actually already know that, but why do we only limit it to the conversation when it comes to childbearing? The brainiest of physicist Einstein said, time is relative, its only worth depends upon what we do as it is passing. Under a special theory of relativity where absolute time does not exist, and everything is relative to your frame of reference. How you experience each passing minute and even second will not be in sync with someone else's by nature of our mortalities, and the most important source of time we should be referencing is not the clock, not your iPhone, but your own self. And trying to sync up with our relative time to the social timeline that in our society is actually quite absolute and unforgiving will only cause us to feel more behind the more we try to adhere to it. So take whatever reference or timeline you have in the depths of your mind, jot it down, map it out, and have yourself a little bonfire because we are starting anew. Married by 28? Burning. Have a stable career by 30? Burning. Have a house by 35? Burning. Now we're ready to get into business, baby. From here lies the most important question for your own frame of reference. What will you regret not doing? Many of the advice from elderly folks in some shape or form always touches on what they regret not doing rather than what they did because a fear of judgment held them back. So if you should throw out all those social expectations and timeline that's holding you down and making you feel like you're behind, what would pain you for not trying when you're, say, 50, 70, or even 90? And if this is the first time you have to think about it from this perspective, then it may take some soul digging to arrive at the answer for the next step. But do not dismiss this step since this will really change your life in terms of not needing to waste more of your time to please the monarchy of absolute social time. I wanted to pull in this quote from a book called Existential Physics by Sabine Hossenfelder, stating that in an infinite amount of time, anything that can happen will eventually happen, no matter how unlikely. Under the context of exploring the theories of how our universe and brains came to be, just think about the grandiosity of that passage for a second and consider this. If your own time's existence was infinite, what would it be calling you to do? So let's come back from the galaxy and back down to Earth. What does this mean in terms of what we can do to live our own calling and honor our own time? Two things. The first is to start now. So many times we wait in angst, perhaps held back by fear, or we try to time it perfectly so everything goes flawlessly and we don't need to bear the shame of not succeeding by following society's footsteps. So if you dream of becoming a musician, then go out there and start taking those lessons. Or if you've always dreamed of traveling the world, then start saving up so it can actually become a reality. Once you think deeply and really contemplate what you regret not doing in this lifetime, then a lot of things that were dictated by our environments become background noise, and we can recognize those social constructs to be measures that really have no relevance for us. Part of living your own time and healing that sense of feeling behind is differentiating between your needs versus other people's needs. Sometimes they may seem so entangled and other people's voices becomes yours because other people are also living in their own fears, projecting them onto you so you don't awaken that fear in them when they see you do something to your own accord. So taking the first steps by starting now will allow you to make out the difference between your own truest needs and dreams and slowly remove you from that social timeline altogether and find your own pace and become your own version of success. The second and absolutely critical point is to start humbly and take it slow. Part of the social timeline that is shaming us is that it's a rat race, a race to see who gets there first, who will outperform the invisible benchmarks and claim the rights to validation. And living your own time outside of those expectations will not have another timeline that others will hold you against. You may still be trialed by others when they don't see you succeed overnight, but remind yourself that this is for yourself and not for them. So stay gentle with yourself and don't beat yourself down for not becoming a master musician or visiting all the countries that you wanted to hit overnight. Part of honoring your own path means making it enjoyable, so if you take the own timeline's expectations to rush and make your own path another standard to live up to, then I guarantee you that you will revert back to your old ways immediately. The practice here is to exist in your own vacuum doing what you're called to do and not looking sideways and comparing yourself against them. Remember, your success can only be measured by your own intrinsic relative time, and any step closer to realizing what you set yourself out to do is already a success compared to yesterday. Don't compare your beginning to other people's middles and ends because that'll only make you feel like you're behind again. It'll only be a matter of time when you reach your own middle and end, but that cannot be predetermined when you start. Don't let the fear get to you. Take small steps humbly, acknowledge your successes along the way, and you'll inch closer and closer to syncing with your own time. I wanted to close by sharing a song that can help you guide you along the way that my best friend shared with me called On Track by Tame Impala. The main chorus goes, but strictly speaking, I'm still on track. Strictly speaking, I'm holding back. Struggles keep falling in my lap. Yeah, but strictly speaking, I'm still on track. The path forward may not be easy, but you'll know that you are on track when you're living your own timeline. And it's really up to you if you want to fall back into the matrix blindly or honor your own truth. Alright friend, I hope you have learned a thing or two from this video. I would greatly appreciate a thumbs up or a subscribe and even a share if you're feeling generous with your time. And until then, take care.